Angelo was a bright boy who watched his family get slaughtered right in front of him. However, after he managed to escape, he received an anonymous letter containing the people who took his family out. So he went on a revenge spree to bury them one by one. It all begins on a rainy day with Angelo receiving a letter from a neighbor on his way home. When he enters his apartment and opens the letter, he reads what's in it and starts smiling like a psychopath. About 7 years ago, Angelo had a best friend named Corteo, whom he invited over one day to spend some time with him. When it got late, Corteo was set to leave, so Angelo's mom, Elena, gave him some sweets and a muffler to keep him warm. Before Corteo left, he waved goodbye to Angelo, wished him a happy birthday, and then rode off on his bicycle into the night. Not long after, Lagusa, Angelo's dad, came home from work and realized his kids were playing hide and seek, so he moved around looking for them. However, he stopped when a man named Vincent showed up at his house with 3 other masked dudes. Vincent revealed that the Don of their family had been taken out, and it made Lagusa wonder if it was the rival Orko family that did it. However, he was shocked when Vincent confessed that he was behind the late Don's death and watched as Vincent pointed a gun at him. Vincent claimed he unalived the Don to protect the Venetti family, and then asked Lagusa to give him the Venetti family's financial records. When Lagusa said the document was in the bank, Vincent got pissed and smacked Elena, which made Luce run out from hiding. As she ran to meet her mom, Lagusa tried to pull a fast one on Vincent to protect his family, but he got caught and took a bullet. Angelo could only hide and watch his mother begging for her life, and his heart was shattered into a million pieces when his mom and sister were shot dead. About 20 minutes later, he got out of the closet and took one last look at what was left of his family. But he was given no time to grieve as one of Vincent's guys spotted him. Immediately, adrenaline kicked in, and it juiced him up enough to run without getting caught and catching a bullet from Vincent's men. Around midnight, Angelo arrived at Corteo's house and opened up about everything. Angelo's tragedy made Corteo feel bad for him, so he allowed him to spend the night at his place and told him they should stick together like brothers. By morning, Angelo woke up and ran back to his house, only to find it already reduced to ashes. With nothing left, he walked out of town and didn't look back. 7 years pass, and Angelo shows up back in his hometown named Lawless and tries to get settled in. Meanwhile, Corteo is somewhere in the city, managing his small drinking bar where he sells good booze. One of his lousy customers, Soroto, tries to convince him to do business with the Orko family, insisting that he'll get rich and get any girl he wants. But Corteo insists on living a boring life. As a result, a big dude enters the room and starts trashing the place to make Corteo change his mind. But before things could get worse, Angelo shows up and one-shots the thug with a spanner. Seeing Angelo for the first time in 7 years shocks Corteo, so he welcomes him and offers him a drink. Out of curiosity, Corteo asks Angelo where he has been for the past 7 years, but Angelo replies that he's changed his identity and that he should keep up with his new name. Hearing this makes Corteo grow worried about Angelo, and he asks if it's okay for him to be back in town after the whole incident with his family. Angelo refuses to answer the question, but decides to ask about Corteo's mom, only to find out that the woman died last summer. Rather than show remorse, he tells Corteo his mother's death means nothing is holding him back and tries to convince him to do business with the Mafia. At first, Corteo declines the offer, but he's forced to accept when Angelo plays the brother card on him. Outside, Corteo points Angelo to a church in the middle of the city, where his booze will fetch the highest price. But he warns that the place is crawling with the worst of the worst, and they might not be allowed to do business there. Despite that, Angelo takes Corteo to the church and meets some Mafia guys from the Venetti family trying to sell booze to a businessman named Grancio. When Grancio figures out that the booze he's been sold might be stolen from the Orko family, he declines buying it because he doesn't want any trouble. But that's when Angelo shows up and tries to make a deal with him. Grancio gives Angelo the middle finger and tells him to get out, claiming he doesn't do business with people built like Gojo's left sack.
Damn!
Despite that, Angelo pours him a shot, and it makes the old man want to punch him. Thanks to one of the Venetti guys, Angelo gets to keep his face in one piece, but the same dude tastes the booze and realizes it's perfect for business. He's just about to seal a bulk deal with Angelo when the door basically explodes off its hinges. And in wanders this dude named Fango from the Orko family, who looks like he has a few screws loose. Fango announces that he's looking for Nero, Don Venetti's son, so Grancio reminds him that Mafia business isn't meant to be carried out in the church, but Fango replies that his booze was stolen and he found it in the parking lot. He then calls Corteo and accuses him of being Nero, but when he threatens to end Corteo's life, Angelo steps forward and claims he's Nero. As he walks closer to Fango, he takes advantage of an opening and attacks him with a dagger, threatening to slit his throat if he doesn't release Corteo. Unfortunately, Fango orders Serpente, one of his guys, to stab Corteo. But at that moment, one of the Vanetti guys saves Corteo. So Fango cuts loose from Angelo and starts raining bullets on everyone. While Angelo takes cover with the other guys, Corteo starts throwing booze at Fango, and it causes an explosion, which allows Angelo and the other dudes to escape. Getting outside, one of the Vanetti guys ruthlessly takes down a thug hiding in their getaway car. After that, Angelo and Corteo join the Vanetti group on a trip off the island, where one of the Vanetti guys takes off his disguise and reveals himself as Nero. At night, Vano and Tranco from the Vanetti family drive off into the woods with stolen booze in their trunk. Since the cops are about to make their rounds, Tranco suggests they pay them off to avoid any issues. However, Vano insists the cops won't be satisfied with anything they get because Scusa, the new head of the Federal Bureau of Prohibition, has already been bought by the Orco family. Not long after, they notice cops closing in on their position, so they exit the car and hide in the woods to avoid getting caught. Surprisingly, the cops turn around and drive the other way, so Vano assumes the coast is clear and calls out to Tranco for them to leave. Suddenly, Serpente crawls out of the shadows and attacks Vano with a knife, forcing Vano to run and hide under his truck. While Vano wonders how he'll save himself, he sees Tranco's corpse lying on the ground and realizes he's cooked if he gets caught. So he stays under the truck and holds onto it long enough for the Orco guys to drive it away. The following day marks a wedding between the Vanetti family and the Galassia family, so Angelo shows up with Corteo and gives Nero a box of booze as a gift. Nero takes it and compliments the taste, then reveals that the groom is from the powerful Galassia family, which controls Chicago, and the bride is his sister, Fio. Hearing this pisses Vano off because he doesn't like the Galassias interfering with the Vanettis. He gets more ticked off when Angelo remarks that the Vanettis recently lost some of their turf to the Orcos. Soon, Nero's aide, Barbaro, shows up and informs Nero that his father needs him. Nero then introduces Angelo and Corteo to Barbaro and leaves to report to his father in the mansion. Getting there, he reports about a playhouse project that'll be done in 3 months. But his younger brother, Frate, interrupts and says that Don Galassia will attend the project's opening event. He also adds that the Orco family will be joining too, and it pisses Nero off because the Orcos have been overstepping lately. Don Vanetti, aka Vincent Vanetti, listens to their conversation and tries to advise Nero to be careful about his next moves. But Nero argues that he can't take advice from a dying man who is barbecuing his lungs every day. Back outside, Vano gets irritated as he watches Ronaldo act all lovey-dovey with Fio, and Ronaldo notices. As a result, Ronaldo approaches Vano's table and makes fun of Don Vanetti's health because the old man is holed up in his office and can't attend the wedding. Hearing this annoys Vano, but Barbaro stops him from doing something stupid. Angelo notices what's going on and roasts Ronaldo, saying his father wished he cheated, but this makes Ronaldo attack him. Though Vano steps in to hold the entitled idiot down, the whole thing causes a scene, but it calms down when Fio shows up, because Vano can't stand her being disappointed in him. Afterward, Angelo gives Barbaro a bottle of wine and insists he take a shot. When Barbaro tastes it, he realizes it's the best wine he's had in a while and asks to speak to Corteo since he's the one behind it. As he walks away with Corteo, Vano compliments Angelo for roasting Ronaldo, while Angelo fakes a smile, claiming they'll make a good team. After the wedding, Nero shares a meal with his guys and talks about his plans for the future. He says he doesn't want to rip off booze from the Orcos because he finds Corteo's wine more profitable, though he adds that he hasn't spoken to his father about it. Vano then suggests putting a target on Fango's back to get back at the Orcos for Tranco's death. But Nero protests against this because the Galassias want the Vanettis and Orcos to play nice with each other. Hearing this pisses Vano off, and he threatens to do the job himself. But Barbaro reminds him that the Orco family isn't the only one he'll have to worry about if things go south. Surprisingly, Nero gives it a second thought and agrees to eliminate Fango, but insists that they won't be the ones pulling the trigger. By sunset, Vano meets Angelo and asks if he's cool with unaliving Fango, and the dude accepts on the condition that he gets to join the Vanetti family, leaving Corteo utterly shocked. Vano warns Angelo that Fango is a dangerous target and then gives him the details of the hit. As Vano exits the room, Corteo crashes out on Angelo for wanting to join the Mafia, but Angelo ignores him and shows him the letter he was sent weeks ago. Corteo reads the letter and is shocked when he finds that it contains the names of the people who took out Angelo's family about 7 years ago. The following week, Angelo goes out with Vano and Serato, ready to do the job on Fango. Serato gets paid for his cooperation, while Angelo heads out to Fango's building and acts drunk to avoid any suspicion. While he's at it, Serpente sees him and beats him up for lying in front of Fango's building, until Serato shows up and drags him away to have a drink. With Serpente gone, Angelo sneaks into the building, up to Fango's room, where he hears the dude have a blast with his girlfriend, Lacrima.
Yeah, boy.
While Fango makes happy sounds, he reacts swiftly when he spots Angelo aiming a gun at him. As Angelo closes in, Fango gets desperate and threatens to stab Lacrima if he does anything stupid. Meanwhile, he quietly gets his gun and pulls the trigger on Angelo. Though he misses, he fires a couple of shots and manages to jump out the window with his sax intact. Soon, Serpente arrives in the room, but before he can shoot Angelo, Vano arrives and knocks him out. Angelo apologizes for not completing the job, but Vano brushes it off as no biggie since Fango is a hard target. However, he sees Serpente's dagger and realizes he's the one who stabbed Tranco, so he decides he'll teach Serpente a valuable lesson. At dawn, Vano takes Serpente, who is now conscious, to the graveyard and shows him Tranco's headstone. All of a sudden, Serpente goes from a stone-cold Mafia thug to a crybaby, begging Vano to spare his life. But Vano gives him the middle finger and tells him to say hi to Lucifer on his behalf.
Hey, welcome to hell. What?
Right then, Vano pulls the trigger, and Serpente drops dead. But as Vano turns to leave, Angelo shoots him because he was involved in his family's death. Later that morning, Angelo shows up at Corteo's apartment and asks if he was home all night. After Corteo confirms that he stayed home, he asks if Fango is dead, but Angelo tells him he screwed up the Fango job. A few hours ago, Nero showed up in the woods and saw Vano's corpse, so he pointed his gun at Angelo, thinking he was working with the Orcos. Angelo lied that he didn't shoot Vano and claimed that if he did, he'd be out of town already. But Nero grabbed him and threatened to eliminate him if he didn't bring Serpente's body. In the present, Angelo narrates what had happened, and from the look on Corteo's face, he realizes he isn't the one who stole Serpente's body. Later that morning, Corteo shows up at Serato's bar and asks the dude what he was up to last night. Serato claims he was out drinking with a friend, but when Corteo reminds him that he was at Fango's apartment last night, Serato acts defensive and says he didn't do anything. He starts shaking when Corteo mentions that Angelo is going to eliminate him for Vano's death, and protests that he didn't shoot Vano. Despite that, he starts packing up to run out of the city, but he calms down when Corteo asks for the truth because he can help. In the meantime, Don Orco eats lasagna with his guys at his family restaurant, but orders the chef behind the meal to be executed because the butter isn't enough. As the chef is dragged away, Fango enters, yelling that he was attacked last night, and then suggests torching Vanetti's turf to get back at them. Don Orco argues against this because Fango doesn't have proof that the Vanetti family attacked him. He also mentions that the Galassia family wants him to make peace with the Vanettis, but Fango insists on taking matters into his own hands. Before he leaves, he asks if anyone has seen Serpente. When he doesn't get a proper answer, he strolls out, mocking Don Orco's appetite. Back at Serato's bar, he narrates that he was at Fango's apartment last night, and he watched as Vano took Serpente to the graveyard. He followed them, but before he could get into the woods, he heard multiple gunshots and figured that Serpente and Vano had shot themselves. He believes this because he knows Serpente was still alive when Vano carried him out of Fango's apartment, but Corteo cuts in and asks how Serpente's body went missing. The question startles Caroto, but that's when Angelo shows up and coldly points a gun at him. While barely managing to avoid soiling himself, Serato yells that he didn't shoot Vano, but he reveals he sold Serpente's body to Scusa. After hearing this, Angelo tells him to lead the way to Serpente's body, threatening to shoot him if it isn't there. At the Vanetti residence, Scusa shows up and informs the Don that Vano is dead, and it was Serpente who did it. When he reveals he has Serpente's body, Gonzo, Don Vanetti's aide, lashes out at him because he knows Scusa wants to use the body to blackmail them. When Frate cuts in and asks Scusa to name his price, Gonzo tells him to zip it, but Ronaldo says Frate is right because if word of Serpente's death gets out, it'll start a fight with the Orcos. Eventually, Don Vanetti offers to pay Scusa, but asks that he bring Serpente's corpse first. Somewhere in the city, Fango sits in a car with some alopecious thug and mentions stopping by the Vanetti mansion to ask about Serpente. While Baldi mentions it's a bad idea, Fango jokes that his lack of guts made him lose all his hair. He then notices notices Nero and his guys in a car and steps on the gas to follow them. That afternoon, Sirotto and Angelo join Nero at an abandoned building to get Serpente's body, and Nero shows up. At the same time, Ronaldo suggests that Nero should be taken out because he believes Nero ordered the hit on Serpente. Frate cuts in, claiming that even if Nero didn't pull the trigger on Serpente, Nero knew Vano was out for Serpente and did nothing about it. As a result, Ronaldo settles for putting a bullet in Nero because his family might get involved in the case if he still lives. Back at the abandoned building, Fango finds Tiger sitting outside and beats him up to get intel on Nero's location. However, he stops when he hears a sound from the second floor and climbs upstairs to see what's up. He shows up holding Tiger as a hostage and finds Nero holding a gun to a masked person's face. Since the person is dressed as Serpente, Fango thinks it's the real Serpente and suggests a hostage swap. Along the way, he notices that the Serpente walking to him is a little thinner than expected and has blood on his clothes, so he takes out his gun and threatens to shoot him. Before that can happen, the masked guy fights back and reveals that he's Angelo, leaving Fango shocked. Immediately, a shootout begins between both sides, but before Fango knows it, Nero and the others escape through a window. While on the streets, Nero thinks about Vano's passing and recalls when Angelo showed him Serpente's body. Back then, he saw something in Angelo's eyes, which is why he can't currently shake the feeling that there's something off about Angelo. In the meantime, Fango sees Serpente's body and realizes he wasn't wrong about the Vanetti's attempt on his life, so he uses it as an excuse to declare war on the Vanetti family. Later that evening, Frate meets Nero at the docks and tells him to leave town because he'll be dead if anyone sees him. When Barbero offers to join Nero, Nero tells him to stay back and monitor their wine business, so Angelo offers to join him instead, and Nero is cool with it. Meanwhile, Scusa shows up at the abandoned building and realizes that Carotto double-crossed him when he sees that Serpente's body is missing. The following morning, Nero sheds tears while he attends Vano's funeral. As the day gets brighter, he leaves town with Angelo, but has no idea that someone else has put a hit on him and Angelo. About a week later, they both stop at a restaurant to get food, and Nero is glad to have something delicious for cheap. He then asks the hot waitress for a cheap place to spend the night, so she tells him about an auto camp where he can rent tents. After Nero is done eating, he thanks the waitress for the help and then tips her $1, but walks out frustrated because if he had extra funds, she'd be with him all night. Later that morning, Angelo drives him to a small town called Kota and gets water for their tent. After that, he joins Nero to watch some kids play, but Nero draws the kids' attention when he starts juggling 2 balls in one hand. The kids find the trick cool and clap for him, but they end up pointing at Angelo to do something cool for them. At first, Nero assumes Angelo isn't the type of guy to perform for kids, only to look up and find his wallet and belt in Angelo's hand. Next thing he knows, his pants drop. And all the kids applaud Angelo's pickpocketing skills. Afterward, Nero sets up his tent while Angelo practices juggling stones with one hand. When Nero notices, he advises him to start with 2 stones and remarks that Vano was better than him at the trick. He goes on to narrate how when he was young, he slipped out of Sunday Mass, swiped some cash from his dad's wallet, and snuck out to a circus with Vano. Although his father found out and gave him a beating, he didn't regret going to the circus. After that, Angelo talks about his childhood, revealing that he's an orphan and joking about becoming a gangster. Out of curiosity, he asks Nero about his first job, and notices that the question is making Nero uncomfortable. Nero narrates that he joined his father to take out a guy who was fleecing money off the Vanettis, and he mentions Lagusa's name as the target. He adds that he had 3 others with him and that he shot at the kid who ran away, but couldn't get him. At night, while Nero is snoring his life out, Angelo confirms his letter and is furious that only 3 people were mentioned in it, because according to Nero, there were 4. The following morning, Angelo drives Nero and stops somewhere in town to shop for supplies. Here, the town sheriff, Nick, shows up, and Nero tells him he's out of gas and needs a place to fill. Despite that, Nick tells him to scram, but after Nero slides a couple of dollars into his hand, he flips and shows him the way to the gas station. At a drugstore, Nero gets on a call with Barbaro, who tells him to run because the Orcos have sent someone after him. He claims the person is as huge as Goliath from the Bible, and also adds that Fango is having issues with the Orcos. After the call, Nero heads to a bar to have a drink, but after the first shot, the bartender tells him to pay up. As Nero realizes he's broke, he begins to think of ideas to raise money at the bar. Meanwhile, Goliath shows up in town with his dog, and Nick checks him to see if he's clean. Since he's a dirty cop, he takes all the money in Goliath's wallet, claiming it's because his dog doesn't have manners. However, Nick checks Goliath's wagon and almost soils himself when he finds a bunch of rotting corpses in it.
Rot gut?
Before he can run for his life, Goliath squeezes him from the back, asking if he's seen two new guys in town. Nick points Goliath in Nero's direction and starts begging to be spared, but Goliath offs him, regardless. Back at the bar, Nero makes a fortune by winning all his opponents at arm wrestling. While he drinks another shot, Goliath barges in, so Nero challenges him to a match, and Goliath agrees. About a split second in, Goliath secures the win and starts punching Nero in the face. But since the poor lad doesn't have enough cash for a face surgery, he kicks Goliath in the sacks and leaves with Angelo. When Goliath wakes up and exits the bar to find his targets, Angelo knocks him over with Nero's car, but is forced to run with Nero when the car refuses to start. At night, they stop by a farm barn to pass the night, but Goliath closes in on their position thanks to his sniffing dog. Soon, Nero and Angelo realize that Goliath is outside already, so they mount stations at the door, ready to take him out when he enters. To their shock, Goliath jumps in from the window and knocks Angelo out with a single punch. As Goliath is about to finish Angelo off, Nero fires a couple of shots at him, but they don't deal any damage, and he's forced to resort to a rake. Despite that, Nero beats him to a pulp, but Angelo regains consciousness and attacks him with a dagger. With Goliath's attention now on Angelo, Nero takes advantage of an opening and stabs Goliath from behind. After that, they decide to exit the barn, but its owner shows up with a shotgun and tells them to stop moving. When he says it again, Angelo figures the farmer is talking to someone else, so he dives with Nero to the ground and allows the farmer to shoot Goliath, who is already about to stab Nero. After that, Nero thanks the farmer for the help and sets off with Angelo on Goliath's wagon. A few days later, Nero gets on a call with Barbaro and is shocked to learn that a truce has been called with the Orcos. Barbaro reveals that Don Orco kicked Fango out, but failed to take him out, and now Fango is holed up on the island with a few guys. This news makes Nero assume he can now go back home, but Barbaro insists they meet up first, and Nero agrees. About 2 days later, Nero drives Angelo out of town, headed for a place called the Lodge. When he gets there, Angelo realizes the place is a brewery and is stunned to learn that Corteo now works there. Barbaro updates Nero on their wine production, revealing that they're fetching a good price, but they haven't been distributed much yet because Corteo's recipe is a bit complicated. After that, Angelo pours himself a shot and compliments Corteo for making something that good, but Corteo straight up asks him when he'll take Nero out. The question shocks Angelo, and he wonders why Corteo is asking, but he replies that he needs to keep Nero alive so he can earn his trust and get close to Don Vanetti. Nero then calls out to him and tells him to tag along so he'll meet the Don and officially join their family. Before Nero leaves, Barbaro tells him to keep close tabs on Ronaldo when he gets home, but Nero thinks Barbaro is being overly cautious. That afternoon, as Don Orco exits his restaurant, Angelo and Nero watch him from a distance and wonder why he's surrounded by lots of guards when his family recently called a truce with the Vanettis. A few hours later, Nero drives to the Vanetti residence, but as he passes the gate, he becomes anxious because the guards aren't the usual ones. However, when Tigre heads out and waves at him, he steps on the gas and starts speeding to the gate. He then tells Angelo to open the door for Tigre to get in, but before Tigre makes it, one of the guards shoots him from behind. Eventually, he makes it into the car and Nero drives off heading to the gate. At the gate, a guard tries to rain bullets on Nero's car, but a guy named Volpe shoots him and joins Nero on the way out. In the car, Volpe suggests taking Tigre to see a doctor, but Nero tells him it's risky because they'll get caught. Volpe then reveals that it's Frate and Ronaldo who ordered the hit on Nero, and they struck early because they felt Nero was already onto them. In the meantime, Ganso yells at Frate, demanding an explanation of what just happened with Nero. Frate reveals that Don Orco demanded Nero's life as one of the conditions of the truce, and justifies taking Nero out because he was the one who tried to unalive Fango at first. Don Vanetti listens and questions why Frate didn't tell him anything, so Frate says it's because he would hesitate to off Nero. It leads to an argument, with Frate claiming they have to do whatever the Galacias tell them to gain their protection, and Don Vanetti firing back that the Vanetti family isn't the Galacias' puppet. At the docks, Nero lays Tigre to rest and learns from Barbaro that it was Frate and Ronaldo who sent Goliath after him. Back at the Vanetti mansion, Ronaldo claims that the Galacia family wants Frate to start running the Vanetti family starting now, and the news excites Frate. But before Ronaldo leaves, he warns Vincent that Nero needs to die. At night, while Nero and his guys are asleep, Corteo tells Angelo to abandon his revenge mission, but Angelo tells him he'll lose his reason for living if he does it. The following morning, Tigre's condition worsens, and Barbaro reports that he can only last an extra day at best if he doesn't receive treatment. As a result, Angelo hints at a way to save him by pointing at the island in the middle of the city, but Nero lashes out at him because Fango is on the island, and there's no way he's working with him after all he's done. By sundown, Angelo snakes out with Corteo and tells him to escape with him from the docks. Corteo accepts without a second thought and joins Angelo on a boat, but Volpe sees them before they take off, though he doesn't shoot. On reaching the other side, Angelo sweet-talks his way past one of Fango's guards, claiming he wants to sell booze to Fango. When he's led into the church, he requests an audience with Fango. Grancio claims Fango won't see him, but Lacrima tells Angelo and Corteo to follow her. She leads them to Fango's office, and when Fango takes a closer look at Angelo, he recalls he's the one who played Serpente and wonders what he wants. Angelo straight up asks for his help with treating Tigre and providing a place for Nero and his guys to lay low. His demands make Fango laugh and almost ask Angelo for his plug, but he begins to crash out when he recalls that Angelo is responsible for Serpente's death. He then points his gun at Angelo, but pulls it away and asks if he has anything good to offer him. Back at the docks, Volpe assumes Angelo has betrayed their team. But Barbaro argues that it isn't true, because if Angelo wanted to betray them, he would have gone to the Orcos or the Venettis. Suddenly, Corteo shows up and confirms that Angelo hasn't betrayed them, because he's negotiated a deal to allow Tigre and the others onto the island. Though Nero admits he can trust Angelo, he isn't too sure about trusting Fango, and Corteo confirms that the deal comes with conditions. Turns out, Angelo promised to bring Don Orco to Fango alive, and he claimed Nero had a plan to make it work so that Nero would be allowed on the island. Currently, Nero finds out about this and freaks out because he's only about 5 seconds smart and can't think of any plan.
Damn! I'm sorry.
However, Barbaro tells him it doesn't matter because if he lets Fango think he has a plan, then Fango won't attack him. A few hours later, Nero and his guys show up at the church on the island and sell Fango the dream that he'll help unalive Don Orco. Out of curiosity, Fango asks how he plans to do it, so Nero says he's too hungry to think and demands that Fango serve him a proper meal first. Fango scoffs and drops his leg on the table, telling Nero to lick it because his boot is made from Italian cow skin. While everyone is shocked, wondering if Nero will do it, Nero sticks out his tongue, then suddenly takes a fork and tries to stab Fango's leg instead. As Fango swiftly pulls his leg away, Nero asks why he's denying him cow skin. So Fango laughs hard and orders Nero to be served real food. In the meantime, Ronaldo and Frate sit in a meeting with Don Orco, where Ronaldo asks if he's heard anything about Nero. Don Orco reveals he heard Nero is doing well for himself thanks to the new Lawless Heaven wine he's selling, but chips in that he wants a piece of the business. Ronaldo assures him that he'll get it once they get Nero, and then begs Don Orco to reach out if he gets any intel on Nero. The following morning, Nero and his guys are relieved when they hear that Tigre will make it, but Nero is a bit worried that he doesn't have a plan to take out Don Orco. However, Angelo reveals that he's always had a plan, and he kept it to himself because he didn't want it to get compromised. Later that morning, Angelo and Nero pay Don Orco a visit at his restaurant to try and sweet-talk the big guy into sparing their lives. While they eat, Don Orco assumes they must have golden sacks to show up at his place like this, but tells them this will be their last meal because there's nothing they can possibly offer him to change his mind. He then reveals that he was friends with Vincent for 40 years, and this intel makes Angelo wonder whether Don Orco is the man behind the letter. Soon, Nero and Angelo are served a fine whiskey as their last drink, but rather than accept his fate, Nero pours the drink away and fills the glass with his own wine. He then offers Don Orco the wine, and although Don Orco's guards are skeptical, he drinks it anyway. To Don Orco's shock, he likes the wine, so Nero offers to give him control of the wine's distribution in exchange for sparing his life. To show he means business, Nero leads Don Orco to the lodge and shows Orco's men around. While Nero's inside, Angelo stays out with Don Orco and asks if he sent him any letters, but Don Orco replies that he didn't. In an attempt to convince Don Orco to trust him, Angelo reveals his identity and his revenge plan against the Venettis. A while later, Don Orco enters the lodge with Angelo to inspect the place and he joins Nero for a drink. However, Don Orco hears a funny sound coming from one of the barrels, so he orders his men to open fire. All the barrels leak wine when shot at, except one, which makes Don Orco figure that someone might be inside. Before he knows it, Volpe storms out and opens fire on Don Orco's men, but he runs off after wiping out a few of them. On the other hand, Angelo picks up a gun and points it at Nero, telling him he's always wanted him dead. before Nero can react, Angelo sinks 2 bullets into him, and Don Orco applauds Angelo for taking revenge on his family. As a result, he agrees to integrate Angelo into his family, and he shares a drink with him to celebrate their success. However, after Don Orco and his guard take a sip, they start feeling sleepy, and that's when they realize Angelo and Nero played them. Later on, Don Orco regains consciousness and finds himself tied up before Fango. As he crashes out at Angelo for betraying him, Fango tells him to zip it because he's taking everything he has. Around sunset, Angelo speaks privately with Corteo and tries to figure out who sent him the letter and why it has only 3 names on it. On second thought, he realizes the person who sent the letter might also be the missing 4th person on his list, and it all makes sense to Corteo. Soon, Nero arrives and compliments Angelo for fooling Don Orco, but Angelo claims he could do it only because he put his heart into it. That evening, Fango takes over the Orco turf and renames it the Fango family. He promises to keep all the nice dishes the previous Don was fond of, and then orders Serato to serve lasagna to his men. At first, one of Fango's guys hesitates to eat the food, but after he tastes it and remarks that it's the best lasagna ever, the other guys start digging into their meal. Some wish they could have more rations, while others wish Don Orco were around to join them. Fango casually tells them that Don Orco isn't around anymore, and they're eating what's left of him. Initially, what he says doesn't click, but they realize they're eating the remains of Don Orco when one person finds a tooth in his meal and starts throwing up. That evening, Fio begs Ronaldo to allow Nero back into the Vanetti family, and Ronaldo replies that he'll only allow it if Nero swears loyalty to the Galacias. In the meantime, Fango entertains Angelo and Nero for breakfast and thanks both guys for helping him take out Orco. As for his next plan, he reveals that he's going after the Vanettis next, so Nero acts like he's cool with it and leaves the table with Angelo. On Nero's way out, Fango says he likes the Lawless Heaven wine, but Nero ignores him because he knows Fango is after the drink's recipe. On the road, Nero asks Angelo for advice on how he'd handle the situation with Fango, so Angelo says they need to return to the Vanetti family, pointing out Frate and Ronaldo as their obstacles. Later on, Ronaldo meets Frade in a dull mood and wonders what's up with him, but realizes it's because of Nero. He tells Frate that he's the future of the Vanetti family, but insists that Nero must die for the family to move forward. While Frate wonders how he'll do it, Ronaldo gives him some powdered sweets to clear his mind and then walks out. Elsewhere, Gonzo meets Nero at a restaurant and asks to speak to him privately. He tells him to come back to the family and promises to settle the beef he has with Frate, claiming everyone misses him. Meanwhile, at night, Frate notices that Nero's new wine is spoiling business for the Vanettis, so he decides to take Nero out, and Ronaldo agrees. A few hours later, Fio meets with Nero and Frate at a restaurant and tries to settle the beef between the brothers. Frate accuses Nero of thinking only about the family's honor because he believes their family will be crushed if they go against the Galacias. Since Nero isn't cool with being the Galacias' puppet, he suggests they resist the Galacias at least. But Frate reminds him that the Galacias are only cool because Fio married Ronaldo. He explains that when they were kids, Nero always did whatever he wanted and still earned their father's respect, while he was constantly looked down on. He also adds that he's siding with Ronaldo now because Ronaldo is the only one who actually acknowledges him. But when Nero calls him a puppet, he snaps and tells Nero to die, and it makes Fio slap him in the face. She then begs Nero to talk to Ronaldo and negotiate things with him because she's grown tired of the violence in their families. As Nero exits the restaurant, he tells Angelo he's going to settle things with Ronaldo, but Angelo insists that Frade can't be trusted. Regardless, Nero still insists on settling things with Ronaldo, so Angelo decides to meet Volpe and convince him that Frate will eliminate Nero very soon. The following day, while Frate and Ronaldo drive out of the Vanetti residence, Volpe shoots at them, but only manages to wound Ronaldo's arm. As he speeds off with Angelo, he admits that he couldn't get Frate, so Angelo drives him into the woods and shoots him. A few hours later, Gonzo, Frate, and some other guys from the Vanetti family find Volpe's body in a car in the woods, and it makes Frate assume that Nero ordered the hit on him. The next day, the media reports that the Vanetti brothers are out to take each other out, and the publication makes Frate shiver because he's scared of dying. While he wonders what he'll do, Ronaldo assures him that nothing will happen, but Frate insists on running away from the city. Pissed, Ronaldo yells at him to stop acting like a chicken, and then promises to work something out. After that, Ronaldo meets Fio in her chambers and tells her he'd like to speak to Nero to settle things. He reminds her that Frate will surely die if things are left unsettled, and if that happens, the Vanettis will be crushed by the Galacias. However, he reminds her that they are having a baby together, and he hopes to use the baby as a symbol of reconciliation between the Galacias and the Vanettis. A while later, Nero receives a call from Fio, and after the call, he sends Angelo to deliver some flowers to Fio at the Vanetti residence. As she gets the flowers, she quietly takes out a small note in it and reads it without Ronaldo noticing. Meanwhile, Ronaldo tells Angelo he'd like to talk to Nero privately, but as Angelo leaves the room, Ronaldo arms himself with a gun. When Fio asks if the gun is really necessary, Ronaldo claims it's just for protection. However, she realizes Ronaldo is playing her and decides to shoot him to prevent him from getting Nero, though she freaks out since it's her first time doing something like that. Not long after, Nero enters Frate's chambers with Angelo and tells him it's over. Frate replies by crashing out that their father only cared about Nero, but Angelo sees through his act and reveals the gun he's hiding under a book. He then drops the gun for Frate and tells him to be a man and end his beef with Ronaldo once and for all. As Angelo exits the room, Frate picks up the gun and Nero begs him not to shoot. But when Frate doesn't listen, Nero is forced to shoot him, and he dies. Meanwhile, Angelo quietly disposes of some bullets. As it turns out, he removed all the bullets from Frate's weapon to make sure Nero shoots him. The following day, Fio is set to travel to Chicago and meet with the Galasias, so Angelo tells her to testify that Frate shot Ronaldo and that Nero shot Frate to prove his loyalty to the Galasias. The following week, a cop named Delphi is appointed as the new head of the Federal Bureau of Prohibition, and he promises to wipe the streets clean of the Mafia scum, including the Fangos and the Venettis. When he announces his intention to cut off the Venettis' income stream by going after the lawless Heaven Wine, Barbero advises Nero to cut down production, but Nero insists because demand is currently high. As for Fango, he seems unbothered about Delphi because he feels Boy Scouts like him are easy to handle, so he decides he'll focus on crushing the Venettis first. One afternoon, while Delphi is having a meal at a restaurant, Angelo arrives with Corteo to buy him off to the Venettis, but Delphi insists he can't be bought. When Angelo reminds him that he has a daughter, he gets a bit scared, but still refuses to accept the cash. On the way out, Corteo questions Angelo on why he had to dig up info on Delphi's family, but Angelo ignores him as if he doesn't exist. Later that afternoon, Nero gets pissed when he realizes that Delphi has exposed multiple bars that sell the lawless Heaven Wine, so he orders his guys to go after Delphi's family. Angelo notices his mood and tries to cheer him up outside, while Corteo watches them and becomes uncomfortable. That evening, Soroto shows up at Corteo's place and teases him because he's now working for the Venettis, even though he initially rebuked getting in bed with the Mafia. Though Corteo says he hates the Mafia, Soroto tells him Fango wants him because the prohibition on wine sales will be ending soon. He adds that Fango intends to make a lot of money with Corteo's help, but Corteo declines working for Fango. The next day, Fango meets with Delphi in private and tips him off about the lodge's location. Once Nero hears that the lodge is being investigated, he immediately orders Delphi's family to be wiped out so the case dies with them. That evening, Corteo flares up at Angelo because he isn't cool with attacking Delphi's family, but Angelo ignores him and throws him a bundle of cash, insisting he stay out of his life. As Angelo leaves the room, Corteo throws the money back at him and yells that Angelo dragged him into his mess. The following morning, Delphi receives a call from the Venettis, urging him to drop the investigation, but he refuses. After the call, he assigns an officer to protect his wife and daughter and sends them off. Suddenly, he receives another call from the Venettis, and the moment he answers, his car outside explodes. Immediately, Delphi storms outside and begins doubting reality, unable to fathom that his family is gone. But he's relieved when he turns around and sees that his wife and daughter didn't get into the car at all. The following day, word spreads that Delphi has quit the police, and Nero is relieved because he can continue his wine business. As he exits a public building, a dude approaches him, claiming he's a fan and would like to join the Venetti family. Barbero tells the guy to stay back, but when the guy refuses, Angelo smells foul play and notices some guys arming themselves with guns at a corner. Immediately, he warns Nero, so Nero reacts swiftly and avoids getting shot at, unlike the wannabe gangster who eats all the bullets. When news of the attack reaches Tigre, he insists that he organized it, while Angelo remarks that there might be a rat amongst them, because only a few people knew where Nero would be today. Meanwhile, that evening, Corteo shivers in Fango's car because he's the rat, and he fears that he might get caught. Rather than console him, Fango teases that he could take him in, but then it would be obvious he was the one who betrayed the Venettis. He then promises to eliminate Nero next time so that the Venettis will crumble and he can make money selling Corteo's wine. Hearing this pisses Corteo off, so he leaves the car and decides to walk to his apartment. The following day, security at the Venetti residence gets tightened, and only a few selected people, like Angelo, are allowed direct access to Nero. That afternoon, Barbero arrives at the lodge and tells Corteo that they are closing down the brewery for a while. Corteo curiously asks if they found the rat, but Barbero replies that everyone's a suspect, including himself. After After their conversation, Corteo leaves to handle packing up the place, but he notices that Barbero is suspicious of him.
Lover boy, you have a special visitor.
That evening, Skusa visits Fango and gives him an important document. He then brings up Corteo and asks Fango what he'll do with him, so Fango decides he'll take Corteo out since he knows too much. A while later, Fango sends Soroto to bring Corteo to his place. When Corteo shows up, Fango offers him a drink and tells him he no longer needs him. Corteo wonders what's going on, but Fango insists he tastes his wine, so he does, and realizes it's the same as Lawless Heaven. As he wonders how that's possible, Fango shows him the drink's recipe and reveals that he got it from Skusa, who stole it from Delphi's confiscated files. Corteo starts begging for his life when Fango approaches him with a stick, and after he sees Skusa's corpse, he starts sweating bullets because he's cooked. Surprisingly, Fango tells him to get out, but as Corteo reaches the door, Fango threatens to tell Nero who betrayed him. Hearing this makes Corteo snap, so he attacks Fango with a bottle and stabs him in the throat, then punches him until he gives up the ghost. Afterward, Corteo leaves Fango's residence in a desperate attempt to leave the city, but he gets caught by Fango's guys the moment he tries to board a train. The next morning, Angelo wakes up to a call from the Venettis, who tell him to show up at the compound. When he does, he finds Corteo tied up and beaten by Fango's guys, and gets told that Corteo is the Rat. Baldy, one of Fango's guys, reveals that Corteo leaked Nero's schedule to Fango the other day, which is why Fango knew where to attack Nero. He then pledges his alliance to the Venettis, revealing that the higher-ups are cool with working with Nero because the Fango family has no future without Fango. Soon, Ganzo enters the room and turns Corteo into his punching bag, demanding why he went after Nero, but Corteo stays quiet. As a result, Nero declares that Corteo will have to die, and it bothers Angelo since he dragged the poor boy into his mess. While he thinks about everything in Nero's office, Barbero enters to deliver sensitive information to Nero and tells Angelo to leave. As Angelo walks past the door, Barbero side-eyes him, concerned that he might be up to something. A while later, Angelo heads to his apartment and crashes out because of Corteo's situation, but he calms down when Soroto visits him. Out of curiosity, Angelo asks Corrado why Corteo attacked Fango, and he learns it's because Fango betrayed Corteo. Soroto reveals that Fango got the Lawless Heaven recipe from Skusa and wanted to dispose of Corteo since he didn't need him anymore. He then questions why Corteo would team up with Fango to eliminate Nero, and it clicks in Angelo's mind that Corteo was only helping him take revenge on the Venettis. So that evening, he leaves his apartment and sneaks into the Venetti compound, heading to break Corteo out. On the way, he hears multiple shots coming from the garage, only to find that Corteo has escaped. Also, Ganzo got shot, and he claims one of Fango's guys did it, though he managed to put him down. Because of Corteo's escape, the whole city is placed on red alert, and a lot of Nero's guys are sent out to find Corteo. Back at the Venetti residence, Barbero tries to raise suspicion that Angelo might be covering for Corteo since they're close, but Nero tells him not to get too suspicious. He only tells Barbero to focus on finding Corteo, and they'll decide what they'll do with him next. Later on, Angelo returns to his apartment and receives a call from Corteo, who reveals that he's been kidnapped and might end up dead if Angelo doesn't take Nero out by tomorrow. Curious, Angelo asks who kidnapped him, and Corteo mentions that it's the man behind the letter, but the call cuts off before he can say the man's name. As a result, Angelo spends the whole night thinking about who might have sent him the letter. The following morning, he starts his day as usual by heading off to the Venetti residence, where Nero finally takes him to his father's office. First, Nero appoints Barbero as a family executive. Then he introduces Angelo as the guy behind Lawless Heaven. Don Venetti sees nothing suspicious about Angelo, so he welcomes him and begs him to protect Nero. He then talks about how Fio and Frade are gone and commends Nero for doing what he did to protect the family. He also criticizes himself for welcoming Ronaldo into the family because he thought it was the best way to protect it, but now he's seen that it only made things worse. With this in mind, he decides that his time as Don is up because he's an old man now, so he appoints Nero as the new Don and proceeds with the handing over ritual. With Nero becoming the new Don, he presides over his first council meeting, where Barbero reveals that the Fango family has been incorporated into theirs. Barbero also suggests expanding sales of the Lawless Heaven wine in Chicago, but Ganzo argues that doing so will create a problem with the Galacias. Nero says it's better to negotiate with the Galacias directly, and decides to send Angelo to meet Don Galacia before the Playhouse's opening. Seeing this, Barbero complains that it's too early for Angelo to be doing deals like that and insists on going himself, but Nero stands firm and assigns the job to Angelo. After the meeting, Tigre and Angelo share a drink with Nero to congratulate him on becoming Don. Since Angelo has recently noticed a certain bodyguard protecting Vincent, he asks who the guy is because he's never heard him talk. Nero replies that the man's name is Del Toro and that he got messed up in the war, which is why he doesn't speak. When Tigre mentions that Del Toro did 5 years in jail and got out recently, Angelo asks if he was with them on Nero's first job. But Nero says Del Toro was in prison before the hit on the Lagusa family. Soon, Tigre excuses himself to use the restroom while Nero starts getting drowsy from the alcohol. Seeing Nero vulnerable, Angelo briefly considers stabbing him since Corteo's life is on the line. But he hesitates when Nero suddenly wakes up and starts talking about Gonzo. Nero tells Angelo that Gonzo has always spoken highly of him and was the one who pushed for Angelo's acceptance into the family. Hearing this, Angelo becomes suspicious of Gonzo, so he fumbles an excuse to leave the room. As he reaches the door, Nero mumbles that he couldn't shoot anyone on his first job because he didn't have the guts for it, and that he spent years throwing himself into the thug life just to gain his father's approval. Angelo glares at him with contempt and asks if he could shoot the kid he failed to shoot 7 years ago. After saying that, he leaves the room and heads straight to Gonzo's apartment, where he realizes Gonzo is the one behind the letter. The following day, Angelo prepares to leave the city for Chicago to meet with the Galacias. Before he hops on a ship, he spots Tigre watching him and learns Tigre is hoping to see whether Corteo will show up. When there's no sign of Corteo, Tigre says his goodbyes and sends Angelo off, completely unaware that Corteo is already on the ship. When Tigre returns to the Vanetti residence, Barbero isn't pleased to hear that Corteo never showed up at the harbor, while Nero tells him to drop his suspicions. As for Gonzo, he recalls what happened the previous day, when he confessed to Angelo that he was the one who sent the letter. Curious, Angelo asked why Gonzo wanted the Vanettis dead, and Gonzo claimed it was because he wanted the town, and all the hot chicks in it, to himself. Since Angelo was at his place, Gonzo assumed Nero was already dead, but Angelo told him that he was keeping Nero alive so he could get to Vincent. He then begged Gonzo to hand Corteo over to him and promised he'd return once Corteo was safe. But if Gonzo refused, Angelo threatened to expose him to Nero. With no other choice, Gonzo agreed and released Corteo. In the present, Angelo brings Corteo back to his old apartment, and Corteo is stunned because the place is as dry as Roddy Ricch's music career. Angelo shrugs and says it's because he lived a boring life and that he only changed after receiving Gonzo's letter. The next day, Angelo serves Corteo a cup of coffee and checks whether he slept well. After that, he heads out with Corteo for grocery shopping, and they enjoy a nice meal together that night. As the days pass, they start living like a couple, but Corteo stays awake one night, knowing their time together won't last. One morning, Angelo tells him he's going back to Lawless and will have to pass through Chicago first. Corteo is sad to hear this, but brightens up when Angelo promises to return to see him. The following day at the Vanetti residence, Tigre crashes out because he still hasn't found Corteo, while Barbero seems more concerned about Angelo taking too long to return from Chicago. Tigre tells him to chill because Chicago is a big city full of hot chicks and booze, and maybe Angelo is just enjoying himself. Suddenly, Angelo appears and tells Nero that the Galacias are on board with the Lawless Heaven business deal. Barbero cuts in, asking why he took so long, and Angelo replies that he had lots of things to try out in Chicago. He lies that although the Chicago girls are 10 over 10 baddies, he doesn't vibe with the booze sold over there, and he thinks Lawless Heaven will be in high demand. Later that evening, Gonzo meets privately with Angelo and applauds him for returning, since he feared Angelo might run off with Corteo. Angelo replies that he came back because he's not done cooking his revenge. Hearing this, Gonzo reveals details about the playhouse opening. He tells Angelo that Vincent will be leaving his mansion for the event, then hands him a gun to take care of the old man. The following day, while Nero inspects the playhouse, Gonzo reminds him that the Galacias will attend the opening and offers to serve as head of security for the day. Nero agrees without hesitation, then asks about Barbero. Gonzo tells him that Barbero is meeting someone in town. Meanwhile, Barbero is at the harbor questioning a staff member about whether he saw Corteo board a ship a few days ago. The guy refuses at first, but opens up after Barbero greases his pocket. Later that day, Angelo gets summoned to the Vanetti mansion because they've finally gotten a lead about Corteo. When he enters Nero's office, Barbero attacks him, accusing him of letting Corteo escape. But Angelo ignores him, even with a gun to his face. Out of nowhere, Corteo bursts into the room, leaving everyone shocked. Apparently, he had been chilling at Angelo's apartment, enjoying the peace, but eventually got fed up with the Mafia drama and decided he wanted a fresh start. One morning, he woke up to a call from Angelo, but when he answered, it was Gonzo. Ganzo told him to return to Lawless because Angelo was in trouble, and that his presence was the only thing preventing Angelo from being blamed for his escape. Now, in the present, Barbaro drags Corteo across the room and demands to know why he tried to eliminate Nero. Corteo says it's because he wanted Angelo to be done with the Venettis. He denies working with Angelo to protect him as a suspect, but Barbaro keeps pushing. Corteo sees through him and teases that Barbaro is only mad because Angelo is in his way of becoming Nero's right-hand man. The jab makes Barbaro snap, and he starts beating Corteo until Nero intervenes. After that, Nero pulls out his weapon to finish Corteo, but decides to let Angelo do it, just like he did with Frade. This shocks Angelo because Corteo is his best friend, and he's done for if he refuses. Once everyone exits the room, Angelo points the gun at Corteo and asks why he came back. Corteo replies that it's because they're brothers, so Angelo shoots him and smiles, promising to see him again soon. The following day, Angelo sits in a meeting with Nero and his guys, where he confirms for the millionth time that the Galacias like the lawless heaven wine. Nero notices his long face and asks if he slept since yesterday, but Angelo flat out ignores him. Soon, Don Galacia and his guys arrive at the compound, and Nero welcomes them with open arms. He brings up Ronaldo and tries to apologize for the way things ended, but the old man brushes it off as no biggie since Frate was handled. He then introduces Nero to a guy named Strega as his nephew and right-hand man, but that's when Vincent enters to welcome everyone. However, just after exchanging pleasantries with Don Galacia, Vincent starts coughing up blood, and he gets shaken because his time is almost up. As Galacia prepares to leave, he speaks privately with Angelo and tries to convince him to join the Galacias, but Angelo insists on staying with the Venettis. That evening, Angelo meets with Gonzo to go over their plans for the Playhouse opening event tomorrow. Since Gonzo is about as smart as a brick, it takes Angelo spelling it out for him to include his own name in the letter, just so it looks convincing that his life is in danger too. As he's about to do it, Angelo casually asks Gonzo if he joined Vincent to attack his family, and he admits to it, though Angelo knows that didn't shoot anyone. He reveals that Vincent was colluding with the Galacias, and that Lagusa found out, so Vincent had to wipe him and his family out. After their conversation ends, Angelo leaves the room, but Strega enters right after to meet Gonzo. Apparently, the two of them are working together to make sure Vincent catches a bullet, since Gonzo wants to inherit the Venetti family and Strega wants him to be a good puppet. That evening, Barbaro meets Nero privately and tries to convince him to take Angelo off security tomorrow because he believes Angelo resents the family for Corteo's passing. Nero replies that Angelo has already cleared all suspicion on himself, and that even if Angelo feels like an empty shell, he'll give him something to live for. After that, Nero checks on his father and tells him the doctor's reports aren't looking good. Realizing he only has a short time left, Vincent questions whether the thing he pulled with Lagusa was the right call, and wonders if there was a better way to resolve the issue. But Nero assures him that he did what he did for the Venetti family, and nothing is more important than that. In the meantime, Angelo returns home and pours himself 2 glasses of wine, one for him and the other for an imaginary Corteo. He seems pleased that his revenge is almost complete, but begins to wonder if what he's done so far is worth it. The following day marks the Playhouse's grand opening ceremony, and reporters swarm the entrance, eager to squeeze a few words out of the leading families. The Venettis arrive first, with the Galacias following shortly after. As the event settles into motion, Angelo surveys the building and quietly slips away to inspect something in another room. Barbaro watches him from a distance and gets more suspicious of him, while the crowd inside the Playhouse rises in a standing ovation to honor both Dons. Don Galacia basks in the admiration, and even Nero seems satisfied with how things are unfolding. Just outside their VIP section, Del Toro stands guard at the door behind them, eyeing a pair of idle security men who are busy gisting instead of working. One of the suited men suddenly plays dumb and lunges at Del Toro with a dagger. Despite the blow, Del Toro powers through the pain, fighting back even when the others rush him from behind. Fueled by adrenaline, he manages to grab and brutally stab his attackers, but the effort drains him, leaving him barely able to stand. As he stumbles toward Nero to warn him, Angelo appears behind him and drives a blade into his back. Immediately, Del Toro collapses, but that's when Barbaro arrives and realizes his suspicions about Angelo were right after all. A while later, Angelo regains consciousness only to find himself strapped to a chair. Barbaro interrogates him, convinced that Angelo's actions are driven by revenge for Corteo. But when Barbaro checks the letter in Angelo's possession, he discovers that the letter outlines a calculated death spree. The whole thing comes as a shocker to Tigre, and he intends on informing Nero, but Barbaro stops him because he feels Nero might go easy on Angelo. As time ticks by, Tigre tells Gonzo what's gone down, so Gonzo tells Tigre to make sure Nero is informed despite Barbaro's warnings. When Gonzo heads down to meet Barbero, he sees the letter and denies knowing anything about it. However, Barbero loses it when he learns that Tigre has gone off to tell Nero what's happened, because he wants to make sure Angelo dies today. Frustrated and full of despair, Barbero picks up his gun and decides to blow a hole through Angelo's head. But before he can pull the trigger, Gonzo pops him. Seeing that things are going according to the way he planned, Gonzo calls Angelo out on his mistakes, only for Angelo to tell him that things are going perfectly. In the meantime, Tigre informs Nero about what's up with Angelo, so Nero leaves his seat to see what's going on for himself. On his way, he runs into Gonzo, who pretends to be wounded and spins a lie that Angelo shot Barbero and fled. Nero's anger spikes when he sees Barbero's lifeless body, and Gonzo drives the lie home by handing Nero the same letter Angelo carried, making it seem like Angelo is after Vincent. Nero accepts it without question, but that's when Strega arrives, threatening to unleash violence if anything happens to the Dons. Before anyone can react, Nero bolts off, desperate to reach his father before Angelo does. However, Angelo reaches Vincent first and uses his familiarity with Don Galacia to be allowed into the room. The moment he enters, he points his gun at Vincent, reveals his true identity, promising to take everything from him. While Vincent quietly accepts his fate, all of a sudden Angelo spins around and shoots Don Galacia instead. The gunshot ripples through the crowd and panic erupts when Angelo continues firing into the Don's body. Vincent is left trembling, horrified, while Strega pretends he's infuriated by his uncle's death and uses it as an excuse to execute Gonzo on the spot. With a cold resolve, he orders his men to wipe out the Venettis completely, and the massacre begins. Amid the chaos, Nero finally finds his frail father struggling to breathe, but he's already too late. Vincent whispers that everything he'd done, all the suffering and decisions, amounted to nothing, and then passes on right after. His death shatters Nero, leaving him drowning in grief and hopelessness as he swears to make Angelo pay. Afterward, Angelo sits restrained under the Galacia family's watch as they wipe out the remaining Venettis. Angelo refuses every meal they offer and stays silent, only for Nero to infiltrate the building and wipe out all the Galacia soldiers inside. Earlier on, the Galacias had tried to bait the Venetti family into exposing themselves so they could wipe them out immediately, but the Venettis answered with gunfire, and chaos erupted. In the middle of the exchange, Nero received a tip about Angelo's location, and the intel rattled him enough to make him leave the island at once. Tiger was worried about him, but Nero wouldn't budge. Currently, Nero sits beside Angelo in a car while Corretto handles the wheel. Before driving off, Corretto breaks down, cursing Angelo for Corteo's death. And the grief hits harder because Corteo never even wanted to be involved in the Mafia. Another twisted detail that stings him is that Corteo died with his V-card intact, and Corretto can't help but cry over everything. As he lashes out, Nero orders him to pull himself together, then turns to Angelo and demands to know who sent the letter. When Angelo answers, "Gonzo," Nero realizes he's been deceived from both sides. But what confuses him even more is why Angelo spared him despite his name being on that very same letter. Angelo explains that he wanted both Nero and Vincent to feel the same pain he endured as a child, and the complete lack of remorse in his voice pushes Nero to the brink. He raises his gun at him, but before he does something he can't undo, he forces himself to stop and knocks Angelo out so he won't provoke him further. Back on the island, Tiger takes a final swig of booze and orders the rest of the Venetti guys to exit the island by boat. On the way, the Galacias ambush them, so Tiger stays behind to hold the line and give his men a chance to escape. Despite the courage he shows, he loses most of his people, runs out of bullets, and dies swimming in gunfire. In the aftermath, Strega smiles, satisfied that he's wiped out the Venettis, and also because he's now head of the Galacia family. The next morning, Corretto stops at a roadside spot to grab food and gas. While he's inside, Nero slips into the driver's seat and takes off alone with Angelo. The day before, when Angelo was still in Galacia custody, Strega had confronted him, demanding to know why he shot Don Galacia. Angelo gave a strange, almost casual answer, saying the Don had already lived a long, full life, and shooting him was simply convenient in that moment. Hearing this, Strega smiled, realizing Angelo was playing both sides and pushing them toward mutual destruction. Curious in return, Angelo asked Strega why he saved him, and Strega replied that it was because Angelo had simply accelerated his plans for becoming Don. He then tried to seduce Angelo into joining the Galacia family, but Angelo was far too twisted in the head to care about any of that. Back in the present, Angelo sits across from Nero in a small restaurant. When the waiter approaches to take their order, Nero tells him flatly that Angelo is a criminal and should be treated as dangerous. Angelo, who had refused every meal up until now, settles instead for a drag of a cigarette. After he's done barbecuing his lungs, he follows Nero out of the restaurant, and they head for another town. They stop at an intersection where Angelo quietly suggests he take a right turn toward the ocean. That night, while the two of them camp out in the woods, Nero asks Angelo why he stayed in the city after everything. Angelo replies that it's because he wanted to witness his revenge unfold with his own eyes. But now that it's happened, he feels nothing, like the whole thing was pointless. The answer hits Nero wrong, fueling his rage, and he comes close to shooting Angelo again. As Nero shouts at him about all the men he murdered, Angelo shouts back in tears, telling Nero he should have shot him when he was a child. His voice cracks as he breaks down completely, sobbing with years of buried pain, and Nero can only stare, stunned. Seeing Angelo like that drags him back to the night his father attacked the Lagusa household. He remembers clearly how he had a clean shot at Angelo back then, but he couldn't bring himself to land a perfect shot. That memory lingers with him now as he watches Angelo cry himself to sleep. The next morning, they stop at another restaurant, and for the first time, Nero unties Angelo's hands to allow him to eat freely. After the meal, Nero allows Angelo to drive, and it doesn't take long for them to reach the ocean. There, they step out of the car and begin walking across the shore together. And at some point, Angelo tells Nero he didn't want to shoot him because he never wanted to. Hearing this, Nero takes out his gun and aims it at Angelo. But unlike last time, he calms himself down and pulls the trigger. Then he gets back into the car and drives away from the water, heading toward whatever life might be waiting for him. Maybe a new one, or maybe just an empty road. That's the end of today's video. If you stayed until now, let me know in the comments if you think Angelo went too far. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want me to post more videos like this. Don't forget to check out the next video. It might just be your best anime recap.